Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. My name is Shay Ryan Douglas, and I am joined once again on a Tuesday afternoon with these fabulous wise women. We have Colleen Scott, Angie Quinn, and Sally Douglas in the house. Thank you, ladies, for joining me. And every Tuesday we get together to open up the discussion about powerful content that can help really transform and change your life just through articulating and expressing deeper felt sense, emotions, experiences, and some of the stories that these ladies have to share based upon their life experience. And today we're going to dive deep, we're going to unpack, we're going to peel back the layers of the power of vulnerability and what it means to be vulnerable, how that impacts our lives. We might hear some great little stories from these ladies and their experience, and really explore how being vulnerable can help us to connect on a deeper level. There's some really great content already out there, but these ladies are going to add some tremendous value through their insights and through their wisdom that they've accumulated over their life experience. And so it's absolute honor and a joy to introduce to you these lovely, lovely ladies. So the power of vulnerability. Who would like to start?
Who's vulnerable enough to start? Go, Cole.
It's such a big topic, and so many. I think a lot of misunderstanding and misconception about what vulnerability actually means. I think there can be sometimes this conversation that it's perceived as either weakness or needy. Or even sometimes there's a confusion about people think vulnerability is like, revealing everything. I call it sometimes like doing your therapy out in the world. So you're offloading all your emotional states, or the first thought that comes to your mind, or you're telling your whole life story with everything in between. And I think that makes it a little bit challenging for people to really understand what vulnerability looks like and how to actually practice it in relationships, because it's about deepening and it's about showing up truly as you are, so that you can connect at a much, much deeper level. So there is discernment in it about, what people may be ready or able to hold space for when you're sharing something that's deep or big. And it's not about deflecting everything that's happening for you internally and throwing it all out over somebody else. It's about having that discernment of recognizing, okay, wow, what's really going on for me here, and how do I want to share this in a way that honors myself and honors the other person, and with wisdom. I think that has to actually enter the conversation about vulnerability as well. So I think that's just a little tidbit, and then I'm sure there's so much more that the other ladies can add in as well.
Yeah, I think for me, literally, I've been living in this state of vulnerability, particularly the last 4 years, since I've kind of left a whole life behind and creating a new one and transitioning into probably a deeper connection with myself. And so vulnerability for me, it comes through when I'm it's like an upwelling within me. If I have to consider what the physical state of stepping into my own personal vulnerability would be, it's this sort of this upwelling of emotion or something that arises within me when I'm being exposed, or when I'm in a situation where I'm being exposed either by myself, self-exposure, or being exposed by others. So I think I liked what Colleen said about being discerning and having boundaries. I think vulnerability there are boundaries that are necessary around self-disclosure, depending on where you are and who you're with and who's actually worthy of when you're choosing to actually disclose a story about yourself. So I think it's not only, it is the vulnerable state really opens us up to exposing ourselves to criticism or judgment, harm. And what seems to be the common, when you get very deeply connected in with yourself, if you're working in circle with people or sharing something that's very personal, you've got what shame can come up. And I think that comes up interestingly and differently for men and women. But it's certainly one of the traits that can be part of natural exposure when you're willing to be vulnerable. And it is a willingness at times, it does require a willingness. And for me, it's like, does vulnerability feed courage, or does courage actually feed vulnerability? And for me, courage is a really big one. So sometimes I might have to choose to be courageous to step into something, and then I expose myself in a vulnerable position, or in my vulnerability, I actually find deep courage. And I've got a myriad of stories I won't share right now, but maybe later in the podcast that where I've actually.
We've just lost Angie, unfortunately. But Sally, would you like to share a little bit of your perspective?
Well, I'd like to continue on from where Angie left off, because for me, I feel like vulnerability is a very courageous move, and it is expressing yourself in such a way that when you're willing to actually express that vulnerability and be seen in that, it shows that you are actually really brave. You're really brave to actually have an awareness to actually shift through and make changes. And that is a really positive aspect of being vulnerable. So I agree with Angie that, as once you are in that place and you're willing to show that, you are taking steps to really step into a brave new part of yourself. So I totally agree, Angie, with what you were saying, that it actually allows you to step into the next part of your journey, on your hero's journey, and actually really step into that courageous, brave self.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. Did you want to finish anything off there, Angie, as well?
Not necessarily, only that I can't remember what line of thought I was on, but it's such a beautiful, vulnerability has so much beauty to it as well. I know if I'm in the presence of, and it's an actual honour to sit in the presence of somebody who's being really authentically vulnerable, and to hold space for that. And it's actually an opportunity to receive somebody else's beauty and their and to come into deeper connection with them. And so therefore you have this natural progression into empathy and the sacredness of vulnerability that comes up, because in those vulnerable conversations there is a sacredness, because sometimes you find that you're sharing something with someone for the first time, or somebody else is sharing something with you for the first time. And there's so much healing that's available in that space when we can actually even hold somebody else's vulnerability. Can we sit in the space of their vulnerability without trying to fix, or without being deeply affected ourselves? Sometimes somebody's vulnerability can, and that's the healing part, particularly when someone does share so radically honestly, and with discernment, and really in a lovely container that you can receive. There's so much healing available for you to receive.
Yeah, that's huge. I really appreciate your perspectives on that. And just to repeat a little bit on what you shared, from Colleen mentioned that it can be a practice to be vulnerable. It takes courage to be vulnerable, and it can be extremely healing, which is really beautiful. And I just want to acknowledge that it takes a certain level of exposure to be vulnerable, to have this conversation on a public arena. So I just want to acknowledge you ladies for stepping into this brave new element of your life and sharing, your stories and your experiences and your insights, because it takes a lot of courage to step out of that fear and be vulnerable. letting go of the judgment of what others might think, and letting go of any of those fears that may be holding you back. And I just want to also just invite anyone who's watching right now. I just want to thank you for joining us in this conversation. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments section and we'll do our best to answer those questions. I've noticed Paula has said hello, and Jack Crawford has mentioned to be vulnerable and be accepted and supported, and that feels safe. Strengthens the bonds of connection within the community. And so with that, how do you ladies, you've mentioned it takes practice to be vulnerable. How do you practice vulnerability if someone wants to be more vulnerable in their relationships and in their lives?
I think it comes back to that conversation that we had last week as well, too, about communication and about listening, because you have to be able to communicate with the people that you're with, that letting them know the space that you're desiring to come from. Sometimes it might just be as simple as saying, you know, I'm wanting to share something that is really personal, or you know, I want to share something that is really meaningful to me. So it could just be like letting the other person know, and then creating that relationship. You have to be able to also, I think, gauge, like, is this person able to hold that space for me? Is that person willing to hold that space? Is this a safe person for me to be able to show up fully in? You know, Angie had already spoken about it with courage. And when we reveal ourselves fully, we open ourselves up to judgment and criticism and all shame, all sorts of things that we as humans tend to have little triggers around. So I think it's just something to, you know, it would be wise to practice with maybe some of the things in our lives that were not so that aren't so big for us, I guess, is how I'm trying to word it, but things that don't challenge us as much, and just get used to. It's like anything, I always say, you know, start small, start with the just, you know, sharing little bits and having those conversations and being able to be real in your relationships, and just notice how that feels, and just kind of then work ourselves up and work our way through that, as opposed to like anything starting and just like, you know, letting everything out and then having all the emotions or the feelings that might come with that, everything from, you know, the worry, the regrets, those kinds of things, which then can kind of put the brakes on to keep us being able to be in that space of staying vulnerable and having the courage to do that. So that's yeah, my kind of little bit about how I would start in that process.
Yeah, I think what you said, Cole, is really relevant about the things that put the brakes on vulnerability. I know, I'm trying to think of some of them off the top of my head, and you might have some too, Sal, but perfectionism, you know, wanting to get it right, wanting approval. Also like embarrassment gets in the way. When you're not certain about something, you're not certain how people will receive if you're really exposing something really deep. I don't know what other things that sort of obstacles that can get in the way. I think when you're a little bit disconnected with yourself, and if you're in a situation where it's an opportunity for you to be vulnerable, and your emotions, or what's upwelling within you, what's arising within you, the fear or the anticipation or the anxiety that's coming up in that situation, if you can stay with that and notice all your own, notice the armor that you, all your defense mechanisms to shut that back down again. And then the stories that you tell yourself as the reason as to why you didn't share, and some of them might be really valid, but other times, I know, for example, sitting in circle, going back to the healing, how healing it can be when you can sit with your own emotion, when you can sit with what's coming up and be with that, and even say, hey, I'm feeling really exposed right now. or I'm not quite sure how to share this, but I'd really like some support around it, and it might come out all wrong. But if you can stay with me, I may find the language, because we can sometimes often, if we just continue to speak to something or give voice to it, we'll
we lost her again, but I'll invite Sally to share maybe your thoughts.
I think for me, it's a bit of the practice of actually knowing your own feelings, and it really starts with really getting in tune with what you're actually feeling to be able to express it and express a vulnerability. So it's a real practice of really understanding, taking the time to look at the patterns that we've got within ourselves when there's things that pop up that maybe we just overshadow them and keep moving on. I think it's taking the time to really feel into them, and then, like you say, having the people you trust that you can share with, and that's especially Jack just mentioned it there with the friends and the family and community. So it's also about building those people that you really feel comfortable to be vulnerable with, and that's probably one of the biggest parts, is to be able to put yourself in a position where you fully can express yourself in your authenticity and really delve into those vulnerable places of emotional expression. So yeah, I think it's in developing the relationships, the connections, the trust, the understanding of self. So yeah, a lot of
good point.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. And we've kind of discussed the how to practice this level of vulnerability. I'm curious to understand, on a deeper level, why is it important to practice vulnerability? What are the benefits? It seems like a scary thing at times to be vulnerable in front of people, or, going up on stage and speaking in front of an audience may be very vulnerable for a lot of people. But what's the positive outcomes that could potentially happen from being vulnerable with others?
I think it's a portal. I think it's a portal into self-love, into joy, into creativity. Yeah, I definitely think it is that opportunity to deepen the connection with yourself and share more of who you are with the people in front of you, or if you're on a stage, the world, depending on how global you're going. And, I guess the bigger you go too, Shay, that's a really good point. Like when you're going on a global scale, you're really opening yourself up to not just one or two people, but thousands and maybe millions, so and at the same time, it is that it's on that spectrum, that emotional spectrum of what takes you into love and joy and creativity, can also take you into fear and shame and the shadow side of your own self, of your false self as such. Not quite sure if I answered that how you wanted it.
I think that, the connection is kind of the reward of being vulnerable, because when you have two people, especially that are able to be in that space, then you're going to have a much deeper connection and understanding. And I feel like there's a huge element of healing that comes with that. A lot of us have kind of shut off being vulnerable because at some point in time in our life we were ridiculed or made wrong, or told it was not okay who we were or what we were doing. And so we internalize that. So when we are able to show up in those relationships where somebody can hold that space for us and we can reveal ourselves fully, and still be loved, which is what we're all looking for, to be, heard, to be seen, to be loved, then we not only have a deeper connection in our relationships, we have more confidence, I feel, in ourselves as well. The courage element comes with that. And we really show our humanity. And I think we also inspire others to do the same. So it's kind of that ripple effect of healing that then goes out at the same time, which is, I think, really, really important. People are looking to each other for, what feels safe and what's okay. And, can I show up and can I still be loved? And I think vulnerability encompasses all of that.
In this particular the way you're expressing it is actually a stepping out of your comfort zone. And it's one of those things that when you do that and you step out and step up, you actually open up a new world of being, and you surprise yourself, and you actually can you can strive and you can go forwards into greater things because you've actually stepped out of the small, scared little box that you thought you were in, and you've exposed yourself, and now you can do amazing things. And it's a really rewarding space to be in. It's actually opening up a new pathway, and it's actually a really positive outcome that comes from stepping out of that vulnerability. And holding that vulnerability in could probably just make things smaller and smaller, and not by sharing and expressing, where you can actually let it go and move forward. So there's a lot about looking at it and expressing it and stepping out.
It's
I actually
certainly
love that. Sorry, go Angie.
Yeah, no, just the two words that came to me, Phil, from your expressing of that is confidence and resilience. It's a great resilience builder, the practice of vulnerability. And I like the fact that, yeah, you can, it sort of builds that, the risk taker within you it gives it an opportunity for you to expand. And learn more and grow more and understand more about yourself.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add, actually, for Sally too, because Sally I consider to be so creative, and she makes all these amazing, beautiful things, and she learns new things all the time, and that a big part of that is you have to be able to be vulnerable and take risks if you're going to try new things. So when you were just talking about that, I was like, yeah, see, that's why Sally's so creative. That's why she's so amazing at these things that she does, because she's willing to go out there and do that and be seen in that way. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really sweet of you, ladies. I really enjoy the connection and the conversation as it flows between you. It seems that very relevant and kind of focus for a lot of your sharings in this conversation around the power of vulnerability has been healing, and how powerful of a healing mechanism vulnerability can be when we step into it as our truth. And just to focus on that little element for the last part of this video, what does it look like and do you think it's actually relevant or necessary for the world to step into more levels of vulnerability and healing, given the circumstance that we're faced upon? Or, are we living in these tiny little constricted boxes where we're so afraid to step out of the box and be vulnerable and share truth, because we're afraid of being vulnerable? Or, what's the balance is my question. What is the balance for creating a larger scale level of healing through being vulnerable?
I feel like communities is a big part of that. So like Angie spoke a few times about being in circle, or women's circles in particular, and that does provide an opportunity for women to be able to show up, to be seen and to be heard and to be loved and valued and respected. And so it's a safe place for someone to be able to do that. And I think that's really important. We want to encourage people to step deeper and deeper into that, and creating those healing places for them to witnessed in their wounds or their traumas or their triggers. And, I suppose what counseling and psychology part of that is about, but we can easily do that for each other on a day-to-day basis as well. And I think what we forget about how powerful and how easy that is to do, whether it's just with your partner or significant other, or your girlfriends or other people that you have in your life that you can share with when you're needing to be heard and you're needing to be seen. I think the world needs a heck of a lot more of that right now. There's too many people. I mean, ironically, we're all walking around with physical masks in many countries, and sadly that kind of also is just another visible or a physical show of how many people are walking around with masks themselves. They're afraid to show parts of themselves, and because of that, we're missing out on the beauty of so many people. And in order to be able to be in that space of sharing the good, the bad, and everything in between. If we're hiding, we're not only missing the things that allegedly we're going to judge as bad or wrong. We're also missing the gifts and the beauty that these people are keeping hidden within. So I think it's a really important thing that we need to be stepping into right now.
Yeah, well said, Colin. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Have anything to share on that one?
Yeah, well, I definitely think the narrative that we're being issued at the moment is making a lot of people feel extremely vulnerable. And more now than ever, we definitely need to look at how we can help each other move through the vulnerabilities and the healing. And it's really a really important part of where we need to go through humankind. We need to start looking at our closest relationships and sharing our expression of vulnerability and connection with each other. And we definitely need to move through that to get to a better place.
I really
agree. I think there's an expansive to expand the conversation more around. There's room for it. Not just the human social vulnerability at the moment that we're all being exposed to, but the economic vulnerability and the environmental vulnerability. How vulnerable is Mother Earth at the moment? So there's such a big conversation aside from the human social conditioning around vulnerability to look at the financial vulnerability that we're the financial situation that we're all vulnerable to, as well as our environmental situation.
Really great perspectives on that. And to take it a little bit step further, and you've mentioned it through the talk in parts. I just want to kind of flesh it out a little bit more and hear your insights on it on a deeper level. Is how do we step into showing up and supporting others who may be vulnerable in our community, particularly in times like we're in today, as you spoke to, the environmental pressures that we're under. There might be potential agricultural pressures that we're under, financial pressures, social pressures, mental, physical pressures and challenges. So how do we, or what does it take to support those who are vulnerable?
I think one of the things that we can do every day that's so simple, and I say this often, is just to show up being kind. I mean, everybody is going through something that we know nothing about. And even the people that we think have it all together don't. We all have something going on in our lives. And I feel as humans, like the one thing that you can do that's so simple, it costs nothing, it's easy to do, is just be kind. A smile goes a heck of a long way. If there are people that we know, that even simple things like a touch or a hug, if that's the right thing to do in the situation as well. Just like they're simple little things. It's not, we don't have to go out and fix everybody. We don't have to, go out and be responsible for everybody, but it's just showing up, being kind and compassionate every single day with every single person that comes across our path. I think it's really that simple. And then from our own lives, it's just having that awareness, like whether it's about like Angie was talking about the environment and Mother Earth, like how can we be kind to Mother Earth, even like how can the daily choices that we make every day, those practical things, like they carry far more power than we actually realize. I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I agree, Cole. And I think you probably said this in a roundabout way, is just not being in judgment of those of yourself or those around you, to be in total allowance of other people's opinions, and to be in total allowance of what's moving in you as well, whether or not there's fear moving in you, or whether or not there's creativity moving in you, just to be in allowance and connected to what's moving in you. And then that naturally just transitions out into community and makes your connections in community more compassionate, more kind, more in allowance. Yeah, Sal, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think we can take it right back to last week and just be, listen to the people that you come in contact with and engage with, and be an open board for them to express themselves. And if they can be vulnerable with you, then you're actually helping to create the future and filling space for the future of all of us.
Yeah. And Shay, I'm not sure what your next question is, darling. I know we're hitting our 30-minute mark. And if I can stay on the line long enough, I'd actually like to bring some awareness into the conversation around a vulnerability hangover. And I didn't actually know what this was until I experienced it a couple of weeks ago. I'd had plenty of them, but I'd not ever been able to give it a language or have an understanding about it. And it was in relation to my own personal sharing and exposing myself as a woman in front of a men's group. And it was beautifully received with such sacredness and honouring. And yet my own conditioning, it really brought up a little bit of core wounding and around my own self-worth and self-esteem. Or did I say too much? Or was I too much? Or were they just being nice? And the actual physical experience was really interesting. It really took me by surprise. I'm thinking, wow, I felt so great about it when I was in the moment, and I felt very received. And then afterwards, my conditioning came in the morning later, and I woke up and my beliefs around was I enough? Was I good enough? Did I speak to something that was true? And it was really interesting. And I was questioning myself, and it wasn't until I sat with another woman who had similar experiences and works in a global situation. And she said, "It sounds to me, Angie, you're suffering what we call a vulnerability hangover." And it's amazing. And I think when we talk about the things that get in the way of us being vulnerable, is if I wasn't able to speak to that afterwards and have someone sit with me and help me understand it, I would have maybe thought, oh, maybe I just took the conversation too far just then. And yet there was great healing that came out of it. But it was really interesting, as confident as I am and as resilient as I am, that there's that part of me in my core wounding that was still questioning, was I too much? And then it did bring up shame. And I think that they're the big obstacles that get in the way, is our beliefs around our own self-worth and self-esteem, and our conditioning gets in the way of us, because vulnerability is also a beautiful portal into sovereignty. And when we can own our own truth and be authentic to ourselves and speak to what's moving in us and come into a real place of sovereignty, usually 99 times out of 100, you'll be really well received. And yet that little part of me still questioned it, and it was named as a vulnerability hangover. And I'm not sure about your own personal experiences, but maybe you've felt that little bit of questioning, the self-doubt that creeps in after you've experienced a really vulnerable moment where you took it upon yourself to expose yourself with your own truth.
Yeah, I love that, Angie. I think that it's probably quite common. Actually, I can relate to that as well, of thinking, oh my gosh, was that too much? Or did I share too much? And questioning and doubting yourself around that. I can totally relate to that. And I feel like when you're talking about sovereignty, that's the big thing. Like, it leads to freedom. Like, if you can be fully vulnerable and show up in that way, then you're free as well. So it's quite a powerful personal thing too. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that sharing, Andy. I thought that was really, really beautiful. And I remember talking to you afterward, and I think it must have been before the hangover because you were still buzzing. Yeah.
It's like anything, Selma, hangover doesn't hit you to the next morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, very beautiful shares, ladies, and powerful insights. Thank you so much for sharing. And again, thank you guys for watching this or listening to this episode on the power of vulnerability with these wise women and these conversations that we love doing. And our intention with these videos is to really share this, to articulate and express the feelings and the insights and perspectives so that it can give you a new outlook on life. It can give you a new understanding, maybe where you can implement these into your own lives and ultimately practice through your lifestyle, ways in which we can all grow together and ways which we can practice working through things in relation to the world we find ourselves, including the people and the environment and our relationship to our finances even. And so it's powerful to open up the conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again next week where we have another conversation. Maybe we could tap into that beautiful element Angie was speaking to around sovereignty and what it takes to be a true sovereign individual in the world. A huge topic that will be, I'm sure, will be potent as ever.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you, Shay.
Thanks,
Thanks,
you,
Shay.
beautiful women.
Thanks, ladies. Thanks, Shay.
Bye for now.
See you next time.